some have begun totally dehumanizing their political opponents and even advocating for the death of their political opponents. So a major question has come up in the aftermath of the assassination. Should people face consequences for celebrating the death of their political opponents? Also, is there a place for this kind of belief in acceptable American political discourse? Where is the line? And should we even draw lines on what is acceptable and unacceptable? I'm joined today by a really great longtime friend of mine, Marcus Maldonado. Thank you so much for coming on here to discuss this with me today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's an important conversation. I think there are a lot of voices across the American conservative movement that are having this debate. So happy to be able to have this conversation with you. We've done a lot of political organizing together over, I guess, close to a decade now. So it's definitely
so crazy. Don't reveal our age, Marcus. Don't reveal our age.
I know.
You know, I was reflecting on this before we started the live stream, that you and I grew up in a political environment where we've never really known civility in politics. And so whenever older generations call for a return to civility, that doesn't really hit home for me, because at least starting in my teenage years, when I really began political activism or even just becoming politically aware, cancel culture was always an integral part of politics for me. Right. And I don't know if you share the same experience as I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been doing political organizing in the era of social media. So that is to say, we've been doing it in the era of cancel culture. I think we've seen cancellations as a tool of political advocacy throughout centuries. I think it's always been a part of social life, but the speed and rapidity with which people can organize a mob and go after someone for a minor social infraction, I think, was something that we as a society weren't prepared for coming into, the mid 2010s. And it's something that you and I and other young people who have been politically active in that era have to grapple with, and kind of have to negotiate these norms and kind of have these conversations to figure out how do we do politics in an era of mass network communication. Because I really think that is kind of the crux of the question.
I do think there's been a few different responses, at least from our generation, to cancel culture from the left. One of those has been to triple down and become even more extreme, albeit usually not under your actual name, right? And that's a response that I think we'll talk about more in this discussion, because really one big question that's looming for me a month since Charlie Kirk's assassination and this implosion on the internet is cancel culture even effective in forming belief? Because one reaction that I saw to cancel culture from the left, and something you saw as well, is that people started moving right, because there is this strong sense of fairness in a lot of people. And a lot of times these cancellations were happening because of, just like you said, minor social infractions or even beliefs that people held, like the majority of people held 20 years ago. Right. And so it was seen as bullying, right? From the people that traditionally would have been bullied, they were becoming the bullies on the internet. One of the other responses, though, that I saw to cancel culture from the left was the consensus-seeking individuals, which I have a minor tendency to be like this. And I think a lot of women especially struggle with this. The consensus-seeking individuals would largely go along with what the mob was telling them to do, because they were concerned about the backlash if they ever committed those social infractions, right? So one event that really reminded me of the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination was the aftermath of George Floyd's death. And how on social media, there was this pressure to not only not say the wrong thing and to hold the acceptable opinion, but to actually say something. There was a strong sense of urgency to post the black square and to signal that you were part of the N group. And then I think the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination was a little different, though, because I don't think people were expecting others to say RIP or or signal in any way. They just didn't like the negative response. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I approach this question similar to you in that I'm interested in cancel culture as like a mechanism. Like, is it actually effective at persuading people to change their mind? And I agree with you, and I think most people that approach this conversation, that having a norm against celebrating the death of your political opponents is perfectly reasonable and is something that anyone in a liberal society should advocate for. But I think the question then becomes, how do you actually effectively enforce that norm? And how do you actually effectively engage with people who break that norm? And I think what we saw with the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination was, I mean, I think the black square comparison is very apt, right? I mean, we saw the New York Post, I believe, was running stories about the sports teams that weren't doing a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk. And say what you will about whether your sports team should or shouldn't make a moment of silence for any particular political activist. I think to go after particular teams for not doing it is particularly wild. And I think as a result, what we've seen is, unfortunately, I think among the vast majority of non-political Americans, like especially people especially online, it seems to me that Charlie Kirk's death has almost become a meme in a way, right? Like, I mean, I've seen non-political accounts making viral jokes that, aren't saying he deserved it, let's say, but I saw one very recently, LSU's football coach was fired, and I was seeing posts that were going viral leading up to his firing that were like, I'm so tired of holding my thoughts in. Charlie Kirk deserved it. My name is Brian Kelly, and I'm the coach of LSU football, right? That's where we've gotten. We've gotten to a place now where it's become something that's memeable by the sorts of people on the internet who engage in that sort of like irony posting. And I think engaging in the sort of cancel cultural maelstrom that people were engaging in, I mean, I think they sort of opened that can of worms up, right? I mean, one sign that I saw that the vibe shift has sort of reverted back in a way was you saw the comedians coming out and saying, whoa, how dare you tell me who I can and cannot joke about. And today we see people who are doing traditional stand-up sets at the Comedy Cellar who are making jokes about Charlie Kirk. And I think immediately following someone's death, I'm of the persuasion that you should engage in a level of humility. You should engage in meekness. You should be humble in how you engage with your political opponents, even if it's not a political killing. I mean, I think when anyone dies, I mean, I come from a more Christian background. I find it pretty repulsive to celebrate anyone's death, regardless of how objectively terrible they may have been. But at the end of the day, like, we have to actually engage with the world the way that it is. We have to engage with this very odd, kind of ethereal online world that we live in now. And we have to actually use methods that work in that world, as opposed to just kind of leaning into the norms that have been established by the sort of like previous dominant force online.
Right. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. Why do you think we've gotten to the point where so many people would celebrate the death of their political opponent? And do you think it's even sincere? That's one question I really have, because in light of not the New York Post, what was it? Politico exposing the group chat of the New York Republicans. Like, my first thought when I saw those texts was, one, this is a private group chat. Like, I doubt they would post this in public. And I'm sure that among this group, these are jokes. Like, they're meant to shock
context
each other.
Is key. Context is
right.
Key.
And so one of the major differences distinctions that I found myself making between people that were posting celebrating Charlie Kirk's death and these guys in this group chat were that the posts in the group chat were private and probably jokes. Whereas the celebrations of the assassination were public, and not all of them were joking. How big do you think this group of people that really feels that, their political opponents deserve to die, how big do you think that group actually is?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think polling on this is going to be difficult, because I think people are going to be biased in a pro-social way. So I don't think we could really even get an accurate sense of where the pulse is on this, even with the polls that are being done. But I think it's a genuine problem. I mean, I think both sides have an approach to political discourse today that treats the other side as non-American, as someone who doesn't share a political community with them. And I think when you approach politics that way, that starts to justify a lot of bad activities. in regards, and one point I want to make on like, how large is this problem? Do we have to really be concerned about political violence? I think 2 points. One is I get really concerned when people talk about the left doing political violence, or the right being fascist, or any of these sort of like broad collective descriptors. I get really, really itchy because, first of all, even if we could accurately describe every single member of a group, like, you're not actually moving the ball forward in terms of improving society, improving the thing that you're looking at. And then you have the second problem of, obviously, most people on the left do not support political violence. Most people on the left are very, very far from that position.
Right. I mean, we're treating this like football teams on a battlefield, or on the football field, right? And there's two sides, and you either belong to one or the other. And if I can be completely frank, that's how I felt in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I think a lot of other political commentators like me felt the same way, that, oh, like, this is different because this is not someone who's in politics. Like, this is someone who's commenting on politics. And therefore it hits home. It feels personal, and it feels like those lines in the sand need to be drawn. I have come down from that emotional high, or emotional low, really. Since then. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I would really actually like to talk about coming down from emotional lows like that, if we can. But yeah, I think they're just easy classifications to make. And I think sometimes it's useful in conversation to classify the left and the right as like two different groups with different behaviors. But even within the right, you see so many differences of belief. I mean, there's a current
lot of diversity
between, the conspiracy theorists and the people who want like a return to sanity, whatever that means. So it is really hard. And I completely understand what you mean, because no, like, Luigi Mangione doesn't represent an entire group of people. No, neither does Charlie Kirk's assassin. Right. But I think the reaction is what a lot of people were kind of glomming onto, to be representative of these groups. And I think the right, largely, if we're, using the easy terms, while I think some people on the right would react the same way some people on the left did in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, I don't know that it would be nearly as widespread. Although, since this has all happened, I think a lot of people on the right would use the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination as an excuse to do the same thing. It's very tit for tat,
Yeah, no, it is. It's a tough line to draw, I'd say. In terms of how we react as the right, and like how we should engage with this kind of broad movement of people that have been celebrating. I think one thing you have to take into account is, when you say like a lot of these posts weren't ironic, et cetera. And obviously, some of these people just stand 10 toes down saying it's great that this guy's dead. I'm very happy about it. And I think at that point, you just have to argue with them. That is the only way we're actually going to improve the situation, is by arguing with them. And if you can't persuade them, at the very least, you can humiliate them in the marketplace of ideas in front of the broad majority of Americans who find their ideas to be abhorrent. And I think that was the same approach we took when we were talking about punching Nazis, right? Like, I mean, we have norms against being a Nazi in America. It is against the traditional American social norms to be a national socialist.
We do also have norms against punching people.
Sure.
No, I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean. Yeah, like that there is a norm against being a Nazi in America, and for good reason. But also, what was shocking is, standing 10 toes down on celebrating the death of your political opponent, and the fact that so many people felt that was an acceptable reaction. I mean, I know that Gen Z, like our generation, we're cuspers. We're like elder Gen Z.
Yes, that's
but
right.
I know that because we grew up on the internet, so much of the way we respond to events is very ironic, a lot of times lacking in empathy. Like, we're overexposed to gore and death and violence. And so, sometimes it's hard for these situations to actually pierce through emotionally for people. But it was just so disturbing. And you know, how normal, regular people, I'm sure in your life too, posted things, you know, on close friends, and you're on their close friends and you're like, what? You know, if I'm really a close friend, you
I was going to say it's a little
wouldn't be saying that
incongruent,
to
isn't
me.
it? Yeah.
So I think going to cancel culture. So yes, we can argue with people. But I think in the immediate aftermath, especially because so many people were grieving, that the resounding emotion that came through was anger. And one thing that's not discussed enough about the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination is that just before that, we also saw videos of Irina Zarutska being brutally murdered on a train. And that was already like so overwhelming, at least for me. And I know for other people, because, you know, I saw myself in that video because I've been on public transportation and felt scared many, many times. And so I think there was this large sense like, oh, people are coming after us, and it's time to stand up and fight for the America that we believe in. And, you know, there are a million unproductive outlets for that kind of anger. And I was very concerned that people would engage in those unproductive outlets. And for the most part, I think they largely didn't. I think there were maybe a few instances where, you know,
I mean, a lot of people got fired. I will say, you know, just
the largely the like maybe destructive but still not violent outlet for the anger was
in that
getting people fired.
Yeah.
I remember seeing posts of people bragging like, oh, this is like my 7th person fired today, you know, sharing the list, sharing the videos. I mean, you know, as like, I think it was just an outlet for people's anger. And I think in the aftermath, people justified using that outlet as a reactivity chamber for their anger at this situation.
I agree.
And so, you know, I'm not saying that to say I'm better than other people. I did not get anyone fired.
I'm willing to I'm willing to stand on that ledge. Okay.
I did not get anyone fired. You know, and I wasn't willing to expose the people in my personal life who were posting nasty stuff on their Instagrams because I felt like it would be unproductive and also kind of mean. And that's still something I care about to a degree. But a lot of people that were engaging in that had been victims of cancel culture themselves in the past.
Yes.
And so there is like this sense of retribution of
they were literally
righteous fury. Yeah. And, you know, I think there are, I wrote this down, like 4 functions that cancel culture can serve. And so if we're judging if cancel culture is effective, we should judge it by which of these functions it serves well. The first being it's punitive. And, you know, I would say it's pretty effective as a punitive mechanism against behavior that we don't want to tolerate in polite society. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, to the extent that a particular individual may get fired from their job for a comment that they made and then reconsider that comment, I think that's possible. But I think at like a social wide level, I think on net, that's not what's going to happen. I think I made this point to you when we spoke on the phone a little bit earlier today. If this was an effective approach, Nicholas Fuentes would be, you know, the largest defender of liberal democracy in 2025. You know, he'd be out there defending freedom of religion and freedom of speech and gay rights. He's obviously not, for very obvious reasons. You know, the folks who went to Charlottesville, they'd be out there at the No Kings protests saying, look at what you did when you canceled me. You converted me.
Yeah.
That's not what happens. And I think something to consider too is we're kind of Streisand affecting these people to a degree, right? Like we're elevating them and maybe we'll get them fired unless they're in a position where their job is where their speech is protected by the First Amendment and they can't be fired for that speech, which a lot of the cases that I've looked at are, you know, public school teachers, university professors. But then we have to actually consider, like, how do we actually eradicate the idea? Like, how do we actually get the idea out of society? And what we do when we elevate these people is a lot of times like we turn them into activists, right? Like we make them even more hardened in their beliefs, and
Yes, because
and
they've lost something.
right. Well, consider like the Weinstein brothers. Consider the folks who have been canceled on the right that have then like taken that reasonably so in many cases and parlayed it into a successful career as a public intellectual.
Right.
I think we risk doing the same thing, and it's very dangerous, especially when you're saying, you know, these people are the sorts of folks who might engage in political violence. So let's further alienate them. Let's make their lives worse. Let's make them, you know, their financial positions worse off. I just don't understand what objectives in terms of like actually achieving civil society, achieving the end of this kind of persecutorial merry-go-round that we've been on. Like, how do we actually get to that point? It doesn't seem to me that the folks that were advocating for firings actually had a coherent plan to get from first we fire this public school teacher, then we enter free speech utopia.
Right. Well, you're kind of addressing the second point I wanted to make about like the aims of cancel culture, which is this belief that it can be rehabilitative. I think it's probably not effective at rehabilitating someone or making them want to change their mind, because you are stripping things that they hold dear or things that are important to them, and you're taking that away. They clearly believed in what they said in the first place. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said it. So now it's the enemy that's taken this thing from me rather than my actions have consequences. Although I think, you know, the same way people probably don't think they can post, you know, the N-word under their public name or post Nazi stuff on their Facebook and stay employed in certain roles. I think it's also fair that people probably shouldn't believe they can, you know, call for political violence and that be something that doesn't, you know, have consequences. I think it's effective as a punitive tool, as, you know, like punishing the behavior, but it's not rehabilitative at all, in my opinion. And especially not when you're putting them on a public list. And, you know, the idea is to preserve them in amber, like a bug at the worst and lowest moment. And, you know, the response I got when I brought up concerns about the lists, or the list, is that, oh, well, if they come out with a public apology, then we'll take them off the list. That's not what the list, I don't think that's what the list owners said. If anyone knows any different, correct me if I'm wrong. But
I actually have. So I was just gonna jump in there. I mean, first of all, I think something that's interesting is it seems I mean, we haven't gotten confirmation yet, but most of the reporting I've seen, it seems like the organization and the folks that are running the Expose Charlie's Murderers website did a crypto grift. It seems that they took in about $30,000 of crypto donations, and they have since gone dark, and no one has heard from them. So I guess we can add that to the potential lists of downsides of cancel culture.
It wouldn't be the internet if a crypto scam was not
That's
involved.
right. That's right.
That's, you know, moral of the story. But yeah, so this idea that like years from now, someone comes out with this grandiose public apology, and then we go back on the list and delete their name. What is the mechanism for that? It doesn't exist. Well,
I would ask, what's the point of publicizing them in the first place if you're not going to do that sort of follow? Like, if I were a cancel culture kind of person, I would say, well, wait, why are we putting them on the list in the first place if we're not actually going to try and enforce accountability with what the point of the list was, right?
Yeah.
I guess this kind of goes back to a point that came up on our initial interaction about this, which was like, how do you separate the objectives of someone being fired for their speech from the actual methods by which that firing takes place?
Yeah. And it's hard to, right? It's
practically impossible.
It's practically impossible.
All of the cases I've looked at are, you know, the libs of TikTok, Laura Loomer, Ryan Fournier, End Wokeness, and a couple of other accounts. Like, I mean, I'm telling you, I've looked at a bunch of these cases. Every single one had one of these big high-profile accounts take this person's name, blast them out, and then I guarantee you, like 3/4 of the messages that school district received were from people who don't even live in the state, maybe not even the United States. Who knows?
Yeah, and so I mean, this is basically a tactic for conservatives to engage in the battlefield of ideas, I guess, is like, it's gone beyond marketplace, but has become a battlefield where we do take things from people. And I think there's something fair there, which is that, you know, the social norm has been defined by left-wing cancel culture. That is what largely the social norm of acceptable speech has been defined by for the past decade. We've seen a growing movement among young people who naturally want to push boundaries against that, which is this, you know, right-wing wave, which has been great in some regards, and also, you know, in others, not amazing. But how can we say that the right or conservatives can't engage in these same tactics or can't engage on this battlefield when left-wing cancel culture has defined the institutions that kind of govern the non-governmental part of our society, right? Like media is totally defined by left-wing cancel culture. They regularly blacklist people that express right-wing opinions. You know, like lots of movies are not getting produced, lots of books are not getting published by right-wing people. And so we've had to build these separate institutions in order to accomplish that. So how can we say that, you know, conservatives are not justified in engaging in these very same tactics? This is a very utilitarian argument.
Sure.
But how can we say that they're not justified in using these tactics when it's very obvious that we've kind of let the left run rampant on the battlefield? And all we've done in response is try to say, you know, can we call a truce now? That's no longer what the right-wing response is, and things are definitely heating up. But I definitely understand that as a justification, even though
I mean, it's the Rufo strategic tit for tat argument, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that argument came out most heavily in response to the Jimmy Kimmel situation, right? I think that's where I think you really see the downside of cancel culture, right? Is you popularize these discursive norms, these like norms around speech in the culture. If they're further back than the First Amendment, it's almost guaranteed that those arguments are going to get levied by some Democratic politician somewhere. If saying that the culture should be such that the speech isn't allowed, it's a guarantee that some politician somewhere is going to take that mantle and run with it. I mean, I think with a lot of these firing examples too, a lot of these folks were pressured by congressmen, right? I mean, I think there are a couple examples I have of like teachers who, like, the congressman from their district was like telling the local school board, like, you need to fire this teacher, you know? And we can say, I think it's reasonable to say that if you're in a public school district and there's a teacher and they post something, let's say they say, if you agree with Charlie Kirk, you deserve a bullet too. Okay, let's say they say something like that. I could see that being so
horrendous,
so disruptive to the school process, to the efficiency and efficient operation of the school, that could be First Amendment, that could not be First Amendment protected, right? And so those considerations are reasonable to bring into this conversation. That's why I said initially that we should look to the First Amendment when we're trying to determine what these norms are, because otherwise, I think we run the risk of these sort of the cultural arguments eventually get levied in favor of policy.
And that's the fourth way that the fourth function of cancel culture is it's protective. So when you have a teacher that theoretically you have a teacher that would express that opinion, or you have a nurse that would express an opinion like that would lead you to believe she or he is providing substandard care to conservative patients, right?
Sure.
I think these are valid reasons for someone to get fired. I also believe in freedom of association. So I think people can, and
they have the right to. Sure.
Everyone, has the right to choose who they're going to associate with and who they won't associate with. So I think it's completely fine for employers to say, listen, you're not upholding the values of our company. You're going to alienate customers, right? So we're going to choose to sever ties. I think that's completely fine. But I also, I think where we can really agree is that the tactics that a lot of the right was using do leave in their wake a lot of people who, maybe weren't justly fired, because we also saw a lot of just, like they weren't nice opinions to express, but they certainly weren't celebrating the death of a political opponent. And a lot of those people got caught in the crossfires as well. And I don't know that there's really a great mechanism for protecting against those excesses. Those excesses will always exist. So really we're like balancing out, well, which aim is more pertinent for society right now. I guess, and I do think,
Good. Oh, I was just gonna say, I think you're saying that these are sort of like the edge cases of these folks who didn't actually celebrate the killing but were fired. I think if you actually look into the cases, the vast majority of them are people who didn't celebrate Charlie Kirk being killed. They're basically people saying, I don't mourn the guy. It's not good that he was murdered, but I think he was a bad person and I don't mourn him. And I find that objectionable, but it's worlds apart. And it's from the idea of, if you're a conservative like Charlie Kirk, you deserve a bullet too, right? Which actually interferes with your ability to educate students and to interact with parents. I think for me, that's really where the rubber hits the road. Is does the speech actually interfere with the efficient operation of the workplace? I mean, this comes from constitutional doctrine. This is from First Amendment doctrine. That's what I'm concerned with. Because if you're really good at your job, and I'm a business owner, I don't want to live in a society where you made a silly tweet and now I have to respond to 100 people that got sent to me from end wokeness, right? I just want to be able to hire the people that actually do the job. I mean, for like one of the people that were fired at Clemson was like a 30-year plus tenured asbestos program manager. Okay. He handled asbestos at Clemson University and he posted some silly stuff about Charlie and he got fired. And I'm sorry, your opinion on Charlie Kirk's assassination does not have any bearing on whether or not you can manage asbestos.
Right.
And I don't think the University of Clemson should have to factor in your opinion on Charlie Kirk's assassination when discerning like who to hire as asbestos program manager. So there's like a merit argument to this too, where I just want corporations to hire the people that are good at the job and let them have their opinions on their private time. And I get concerned about like endorsing cultural norms and mechanisms that make it harder for employers to keep people around simply because those people have silly takes on the internet.
Yeah, I think really the main function all of this served was to push back on left-wing dominance of what is defined as like an acceptable opinion. That was the biggest function it served, in my opinion. Do I think we succeeded? I say we. I didn't participate in.
Which I think is
getting people fired.
Which I do think is an interesting point, that you like kind of endorse the objectives, but you aren't willing to. And I'm not saying like and 10 toes down, well, Maggie, and go cancel some people, but yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of things I'm not comfortable with the government doing that I'm not exactly comfortable with me doing, that I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna hate you if you do this thing. Like, I understand.
Sure, yeah.
And I do think that we need some way. Can you hear me? My AirPods just cut in and out. Oh, yep, they totally cut out. I think there needs to be some way for us to reinforce this norm that political violence is not acceptable. And I've become especially concerned about this in the wake of Luigi Mangione and what he did to Brian Thompson. Because what I saw in the aftermath of that was disturbing. That's like one word I would say. And it seems like other people were not so disturbed. And some of the reaction I got when I was very vocally opposed to the yassification of Luigi Mangione was that, well, he's attractive and people have problems with healthcare in America. And it's like that justification, that celebration of this murder, I think ultimately led to, I think that political climate created a climate where Charlie Kirk's assassin felt emboldened to kill him, I think it's the same kind of political climate that led to the assassination attempts against Donald Trump, that led to assassination attempts against Steve Scalise. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a long time ago, but now it's kind of ramping up to where it's private citizens. And I have a lot of concerns about that. And I have a lot of concerns that the reaction to these events that are celebratory are going to just create more down the line. Now, what does the right do with that? How do we actually combat this huge man?
I have the answer. Problem? I came to this conversation prepared with this very important. No, I think this is the crucial question. The way that I think about this is I think a lot of the really dangerous political ideology that we see today, whether it's, Mangionism on the far left or, Groypers on the far right or Bappism or pick your strain of weird internet right-wingism that you see today, is there's this odd obsession with the spectacle, with like the visual, with powerful imagery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say it's like fascist, because obviously you can't say it's the left and the right, I guess, but there's this very odd obsession with the spectacle and like of being something worth looking at, right? I mean, look at us right now, right? We could just have this conversation, you and I on a phone, no one listens in, but instead we decided I want to go on a live stream and I want people to watch me and to look at me and to have eyeballs on me. And all day I was nervous out of my shoes about it, right? But I think that's part of the problem. I think that's part of the driver of this. I think our culture is very narcissistic. Our culture is very, and coming from a libertarian, this is going to sound quite odd, it's very individualistic in a way that I think is dangerous, in a way that goes beyond the sort of classical liberal interpretation of individualism. And I think a lot of that stuff drives these people. I think a lot of that stuff drives online radicalism. Is people just want to feel a part of something big. It's not just like the meaning thing. It's about, I want to be a thing. I want to be something that is worth looking at. And like, I want to have my name in a Wikipedia page one day, right? Yeah. I think it's that sort of mentality for a lot of people.
You think that's new though? Because images were always so powerful for people, and they can be used for really positive things. I would agree that we have become vastly more narcissistic. I mean, even just like, I think I became aware of this because of Red Scare. Like, like I remember Anna talking about, how narcissistic women are with like posting selfies for like no reason and then trying to justify it. And it's like, just accept that you want attention.
Just want to do some peacocking. Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, everyone's just obsessed with like looking at themselves. Everyone wants to be great, at least on the internet. Everyone wants to be great. So you think that this is just part of that, like wanting your name in the history books?
Yeah, I think that's part of the motivation for a lot of the people that are doing this. And then I think for people who engage with it online, there's this weird abstraction that takes place with like digital media, where like you don't treat the people you see online as like people. You treat them like they're basically like fictional characters.
Yeah.
Like it's Mr. Magoo is no different to you than Charlie Kirk. So if Mr. Magoo dies in the movie, who cares? It's a movie. I think a lot of people who engage in politics exclusively online, they suffer from a sort of like virtual sickness. Yeah. Where the only way they can think about political actions is in this sort of abstract, depersonified way where they're not actually dealing with like repercussions. And obviously part of cancel culture is to say, hey, this isn't abstract. You live in a real society and there are repercussions for what you say. And so I do understand like how that mechanism sort of got instituted online, because I think like the natural way that people act online is in opposition to that. It's to be more virtual. It's to abstract yourself away from consequences, I think. And so I think cancel culture kind of arose as like an enforcement mechanism against that mentality. And now we're sort of debating like where the line is, like how do we enforce these norms? What even are norms on the internet? Can we have norms on the internet? So yeah, I think like a lot of that stuff's going on in the background I know. A lot of that stuff's going on in the background when I'm thinking about this stuff.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. Not to plug Undoctrination, my YouTube channel with Fee, but this week I'm releasing a video on hyper reality, unreality, Baudrillard's work on simulations.
Cool. Yeah.
and how that relates to social media. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like even the videos you watch of Charlie Kirk speaking, that's not you in reality experiencing Charlie Kirk. It's a simulation
Yes.
of what happened.
Absolutely.
Even if it's accurately capturing what happened, but it's a simulation of that because you don't see the before or the after, everything is out of context if you think about it. And so we download that information as if it's real, and then we like impose this unreality onto the actual environment in which we live. And this brings me to another point I wanted to make about conversations with friends, because I think, this is something we mentioned earlier. This is what really snapped me out of this like days that I was in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. Where I was just like fearful and feeling very emotionally impacted. And I still feel that way, but I don't feel fearful anymore. And what really caused that was, I had an experience where someone said something in my personal life that made me like have the freeze response, because I was like, uh-oh, like they feel very differently about this incident than I do. And that means they are like this person that I've seen online. And after examining that, because they are not like the other people I see online, they're my friend.
Right.
And they don't want me to die. I talked to them and just like shared how I was feeling about everything rather than how I was even feeling about what they said.
Yeah.
Right. And it like allowed for a moment of genuine connection and for, us to both understand one another rather than like, both of us in our own way trying to paint a picture of the other person based on people we associate them with online. Right. Like who we are online is not who we are in the real world. And I think part of the reason, cancel culture has become such a toxic infection and parasite in the real world is because we're so disconnected from like the people and the communities that are actually around us physically. The internet has done a lot of great things for us. It's connected us in a lot of really beautiful ways. People have really weird jobs now because of the internet, and I think that's pretty cool. I don't know, go on Etsy. People have all sorts of like really strange hobbies that they've turned into their full-time careers. And that's super cool.
Maggie, you do YouTube. So
I do YouTube for a living, which is amazing. And I love my job so much. But also it really has connected us in a lot of nasty ways. And part of my hesitation about the canceling on the right, the cancel culture that took place on the right, is this disconnection from the people that we're canceling, because we're disconnected from the consequences they suffer. And, when it's kept in an in-person community, shame is a really powerful thing and can be actually a very good thing. We can really regulate against some of the nasty excesses of human behavior when we have powerful in-person communities. But when that's outsourced online, when we abdicate our responsibility to taking care of each other to the government, rather than through like churches and local groups, we start feeling more atomized. And that's not individualism, that's atomization. And that makes us flock to the internet for that sense of belonging, where we end up doing things to other people that maybe aren't reflective of our best selves,
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone sort of carries these frames around in their head of like the political spectrum generally, but especially their political opponents. And I think it's really easy, if you're someone who lives in this world, to kind of take those frames and to apply them to people that you actually interact with in your day-to-day life, in your personal life. I think it's really dangerous. I think the word you used of outsourcing, of like sort of saying like, I don't want to do that work of engaging with people, and let's let the government do it, or let's let the mob or some cancel culture account do it. I think it's really easy for people. I think it lets them it still lets you say like, oh, I did something. I sent that post to end wokeness. I did something. I did my bit of work today.
Yeah.
Instead of actually like having a conversation with, your aunt or, your 6th grade teacher and now you're
That's uncomfortable.
Right? It is.
To engage with someone that you think might hate you because of your political beliefs. And I don't know if you've
Maggie, we were doing libertarian advocacy on college campuses. If there's anything I know how to do, it's talk to people that eat my guts.
Well, and also like, I think throughout my time as a political activist, and I don't know if you've felt this way as well, I've lost friendships simply because I was like uncomfortable with the idea that they could distance themselves from me or reject me for my political beliefs. And I think a lot of people online on the right, because we have been the victims of cancel culture, I think a lot of people have downloaded that information and have like distanced themselves from friendships that could still be going strong because they're nervous about how the other person is going to react to them and their true selves and their beliefs. Although I don't know that we should really wrap up our identities in our political beliefs, even if you're like being
I agree
for work.
But it's difficult. It's difficult. And I think today, like it's a lot easier to just kind of slip into it where you start thinking about everything from the frame of your politics. I mean, I see people who are Christians who will frame their religious beliefs in terms of how it justifies their politics. And to me, that's completely backwards. And I don't think that they sat down one day and said, I'm going to prioritize earthly matters over the matters of the eternal kingdom. No, I think they just were working their day-to-day life and they started engaging with these questions. And that's just how they started to think about it. And I think it's really easy online to slip into these sorts of discursive frames. I think it's really a big risk for both sides of the political spectrum. I'm not the kind of person that says we need to be like tone policing the extremes in our political wings, but we do need to be like engaging with them and like arguing with them and making sure that we're putting those things out into the public. Because I think with the challenge of kind of talking to your left-wing friends, I think a lot of the problems come from the fact that the left has sort of forgotten how to engage with people. That even if you are a fascist, like let's say you literally are a fascist, you genuinely believe in fascism, there's a way to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And you can't just shut down the conversation by like being like, well, you're fascist. And if I'm discussion, it's like that's.
And if I'm an establishment, center left liberal, like I just got the easiest debate in my life. I'm debating a fascist. I know all of the arguments. But I think what happened is cancel culture took over online, and we literally just forgot how to have those arguments. Yeah. And that's why you see people who have these kind of crazy beliefs kind of floating up. And it affects your interpersonal relationships. You forget how to have these conversations with people who are in your day-to-day life, and you just sort of group them in with the things you see online. And I think it's really important that we actually like exercise that muscle of having that discourse. My friends probably get annoyed that I swipe up on so many of their silly political Instagram stories. But like, I'm interested. I want to know what they think. I want to know how they got to that conclusion, even if it took them, 2 TikToks to get to that conclusion. That's all the research they did. I want to know and have the conversation. And I think like that's the like hard work of democracy. And I know that's like a squishy word for these days, but like that's like the hard work of just like small d, like I want to elect my political leaders democracy of like talking to people that disagree with you, especially people that are in your immediate social circle.
Yeah. And I will say this about making being right wing more acceptable, like challenging the frame that the left has built through cancel culture. What I have done in my personal life is just everyone knows what I think.
Yes.
Okay. Like I don't act ashamed of my beliefs. And I think that's actually something that makes a huge difference because
absolutely
a lot of right-wing people, and right-wing, by the way, encompasses a lot of different beliefs. Okay. A lot of different beliefs. But I think a lot of right-wing people have like actually have a huge shame complex and won't say what they think in front of their friends that aren't right-wing, because
we swim in liberal waters, right? I think like the broad kind of cultural milieu of modern America is like social liberalism.
Totally. So, and I do have a job that allows me to be employed and have the beliefs that I have. And that is a huge problem that I think we are trying to fight back against by engaging in cancel culture on the right, is by maybe resettling where some of those lines are drawn. by proving that like the left doesn't have a dominance on what's like acceptable in polite society. But at least in my circles, what I've tried to do is just be happy, unashamed, chill, show people that I have more interests than just politics. I like pop music. I like, gossiping. I like doing all of the normal girl things.
Isn't that just politics?
Okay. I like doing all of that stuff. I like history. I like economics. I like nerdy stuff too. But just being like a multifaceted human being allows people that are close to me to see that I'm not this two-dimensional figure that maybe they see on the internet. And that's actually really worked for having our friends maybe even move right or just be open to talking with us about things. I found that to be really, really useful. And so it's something that I would recommend to anyone who's listening that is maybe wondering what they can actually do that's not, calling up employers, even though, I understand why that's the temptation in response to Charlie Kirk's assassination and the celebration. I get it. But I think trying to ground yourself more in the real world is like a much more positive way to react to this event.
Absolutely. I think you need to ask yourself, like, what kind of world do I want to live in? Do we want to continue to live in this world where the seesaw of cancel culture just continues to go back and forth, like every single time there's like a cultural vibe shift, right? I don't want to live. I want us to get to a place where what you post on your private social media is what you post on your private social media, and we don't go after your employer because of what you posted. Unless
there's active harm.
I mean, if it's not First Amendment protected, if you're threatening people, if you're engaging in libel, yes, of course, all the standard First Amendment exceptions apply. But I think as a cultural norm, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what kind of society do you want to live in?
Totally. And also, I want the right to adopt forgiveness as a central part of our platform. Because I think a lot of people who left the left did so because the left was so brutal and unforgiving and didn't allow for humans to be humans and make mistakes. And over the years, the right has, like, whenever discourse pops up, occasionally gets very unforgiving and mean and like, no, you can't rehabilitate. But, I am right wing, whatever that means, because I believe in human dignity and I believe in people's ability to get better over and over and over again and to fail and then get up again and keep going. Like, that is a core part of why I believe what I believe. And so I really hope that conservatives, libertarians, what have you, take that to heart, because I think that's one of the main failures of the left, and what's pushed so many people away is that the left has become pretty unforgiving and doesn't allow for people to make mistakes. And I think that's a big mistake on their part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it opened up the watershed for what's happening now, right? I mean, they built the tools that are now being wielded against them. And I think that has to be taken into account. I think a lot of the points you made about, folks who are doing a lot of this canceling today were folks who were canceled yesterday. I think that's deeply relevant. I think it's something that we have to grapple with. And the folks who were leading the cancel mobs 5-10 years ago need to recognize that this is the sort of situation they got themselves into. And what I was going to say is, there's one argument about this that I've heard that I think is interesting, and that's the sort of flank effect argument, right? I think as Cruz Rufus put this out, which is basically like, the moderate pro-free speech liberal types, they aren't going to be the ones that actually do it. You need the AK-47 on the table to get these people to negotiate. And I think it's an interesting kind of empirical question. But I think in terms of where we want to go philosophically, I think we have to just recognize that handing the AK-47 back and forth between the two dominant political tribes in this country over and over every time there's an election doesn't actually solve the problem.
I also think if we become unmoored from our values, like what's the point, and free speech is that's why I got involved in this. I'm sure it's part of why you became involved in activism. It's been like a huge part of our, it was a huge part of our campus activist life. It was a huge reason I considered Charlie Kirk, a brother in arms, basically, because we were both fighting this free speech battle on campus. So I think we need to remember why we're doing this in the first place and not become totally detached from those core values. Anders, I was wondering if there's any questions in the chat that you want to pass to us before we wrap up. Okay, no problem. Well, Marcus, any final thoughts?
I think the main point I just wanted to hit on is what kind of society do you want to live in? How do we get past the seesaw of cancel culture? How do we get to a place where we can actually have stable civil discourse norms? I think the point you made at the beginning about, there is no going back to folks at our age. This is what we've grown up in. I'm tired of it. I think a lot of folks my age and younger are tired of it. I think it's leading to a lot of the nihilism problems. So I think we really desperately need to figure out how we're going to resolve the civil discourse challenges in this country. And I think starting with actual discussion and reaching out to people when they say things you find objectionable is the first step we need to take.
Totally agree, Marcus. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you, Maggie. This was great.
I hope the audience enjoyed it. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching. And let me know if y'all want to do a part 2. I don't know what's going to happen next.
It seems there's more free speech news in the news every single day, which is unfortunate. Okay. So I'm sure there would be something.
Awesome. And thank you to Young Voices for hosting this event. We appreciate you guys. And I'll see you guys on Twitter. Okay, bye.